Welcome to week 2. I almost had another sitting video. We just got done with the rain, but we're through it, so I am walking. All right, so good job for the first discussion boards. There was a lot of good discussion. I guess the first thing I want to kick off with is a brief discussion to make sure that you get the idea of how we're doing what we're doing. So the trolley scenarios are all called thought experiments, right? Thought experiments are kind of one of the main pieces of evidence, if you will, that philosophers use. There are a lot of things that you can settle through thought experiments, if that is, we all have the same intuitions, right? Which the reason why the trolley problem is famous is because we don't all have the same intuitions, right? But in some cases, it's just a slam dunk argument because you tell the story, everyone agrees, oh yeah, that's what we should conclude about that story. And so then there you make your philosophical point and kind of move on, right? So a little bit about how thought experiments work. They usually are aimed at one single point, right? And so you really can sculpt a thought experiment exactly how you want it. It doesn't even have to be real world. We can use aliens and future technology and things that could never even happen. As long as the things that are unrealistic aren't really important regarding the point you're trying to really narrow in on, right? So, for example, with the trolley problem, we don't have to ask, right, would the fat man fight back? Or we don't have to ask the people on the tracks, are some of them our friends or some of them our enemies? Those things, if that's not what you're trying to exactly discuss, then you just make stipulations. That's how you do thought experiments. You stipulate as much as you need to stipulate to get exactly hone in on exactly the question. In the case of the trolley problem, the question mostly has to do with rights and rules and things like that. Because if you remember, as I set it up, the normal response to the first two versions. Well, okay, I'll say the normal response to all three versions. So the switch, the normal response is that it's okay to flip the switch. The fat man case, the more normal response is that it's not okay to push the fat man, although that one a lot of times kind of split a class 50-50. Transplant, most people say no, you should not take the organs without consent. So really it's trying to narrow in on why is it, given that all three of these scenarios have roughly the same outcome, that they're not morally the same. And so it seems to be the case that something matters morally other than outcomes, right? That's what it's all aimed at. Actually, as it turns out, as a class, we had some interesting responses. We had some, for example, Brenda and Xiao Jun, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, who agreed you should not even flip the switch, right? Brenda kind of worded it as, who am I to decide? Xiao Jun kind of worded it as, if I flip the switch, then I'm the one responsible for the death, not just fate or whatever. And so obviously then on the other two, they would keep their hands off as well. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got like Audrey, for example, who would take the 5 organs. She even noted it would not be ethical medically. I'm not sure if she means like professional, like according to the professional code, or if she actually means like morally it's not ethical. If morally it's not ethical, then she's kind of admitting she would do something unethical, but she might not be, depending on how you read that. But anyway, Jackson said something pretty similar. So we had people on both ends of spectrums. So trolley problem is generally not one of them that we all have the same intuitions and we can just go from there, but it's definitely interesting to discuss. Okay, the next thing we're getting into, so thought experiments are one of the main tools that philosophers use. The main tool, though, that philosophers use is logic. Logic itself is one of the areas of philosophy, as you should know by now. And so I'm going to teach you for a week some logic. I've taken 3 different courses on logic, right? You can get really deep into this, lots of symbols and all that. It becomes about as complicated as calculus. But we're just going to try to make it as simple as possible and give you kind of the bare bones of how logic works. Partly just so you can get the sense that we're not just kind of pushing our feelings back and forth on each other when we do philosophy, right? There are tools that they're precise, and this is what they are. I'm going to cover 3 different kinds of arguments. So inductive, inference best explanation, and deductive. Inductive is just kind of like a generalization. I'm going to have you think of political polls when I say that word. Inference best explanation is like what a detective does, where you were asking which causes could actually even explain what you're trying to explain, and then of those causes, which one is the most likely, which we'll call prior probability. You're supposed to update your priors as you go along, gather more evidence, and that's kind of how that works. But deduction is really the main form of logic that that philosophers use. In deductive arguments, there are certain rules about how to do them. The main thing to understand deductive arguments is the concept of validity. And if you look in the book, Huemer does a pretty good job of explaining that part. I actually used the book as an optional reading because I gave you something online as the required reading. But doing both is not a bad idea if you're having a tough time. Sorry, I lost my voice a couple days ago, so it's coming through every once in a while. But so yeah, deductive arguments are supposed to be airtight in the sense that if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. And when they are airtight in that kind of way, that's when we say they're valid. It doesn't mean that the conclusion actually is true. It just means that if the premises are true, then the conclusion would have to be true. It's a note about the structure of how it's arranged. Is it arranged the right way structurally? And if it is, then it just sets the agenda so that you have to deny one of the premises or accept the conclusion, right? Okay, so that's enough preview. Let's get going. It could be a tough week for some of you. Formal logic comes more naturally to some people than others, and that's just how it goes. And it's really normal to have to, really with all of philosophy, to kind of have to read things twice. But let me know if you have any questions.